So, ladies and gentlemen, in recent days, the media, including myself, have talked a lot about Vladimir Guerrero joining the franchise and being a recruited player since he was a young teenager. But we're going to talk about a little bit of Blue Jay history that has kind of been forgotten when the Blue Jays were owned by a beer company and a bank. And 1985 or the mid 80s was the new wave movement, all kind of 1980s tropes and stuff like that. And the Blue Jays in 1985 end up divisional champions, but unfortunately, due to circumstances with bad coaching and the platoon system used gone bad, they lost to Kansas City in the ALCS after leading 3-1 in the series, and he played for the last two games at home, but still lost. But we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Now, the 1985 Blue Jays, that season it was their ninth season in Major League Baseball, and after a decade of building up the team, including such young prospects as Ernie Witt, Lloyd Mosby, George Bell, Jesse Barfield, Dave Stieb as well, Jim Clancy, they were primed for a divisional run. Now, in 1983, when I saw the Blue Jays twice at Exhibition Stadium, they had some of the bases of that squad, but they made some tinkering to the lineup, and it really came to the fore in 1985. Now, a lot of people felt that the big problem with Toronto that year, they were still trying to find a relief pitcher to solidify the closing mechanism under Bobby Cox. Now, in December of '84, just a month before the regular season, Toronto made a salary dump and a player dump of Alfredo Griffin, Dave Collins, and Cash to the Athletics for a middle-of-the-road reliever by the name of Bill Caudle. Now, just a few weeks later, they took a move towards the future to pick up Tom Henke as a free agent pick, and he ended up being a great reliever for Toronto that season and the season followings. And the third way to shore up their bullpen, the veteran Gary Lavelle from San Francisco, they gave up actually a good reliever and a good pitcher, a name of Jim Gott, and that was some really weird trading to basically go for either a veteran or unproved relievers for players that could really do it. Now, this was the year, of course, where Buck Martinez and Ernie Witt were sharing the catching duties before Martinez was severely injured in a game against Seattle on July 9th. Dave Stieb had probably one of his best years that year with a 2.48 ERA, and he had 26 consecutive scoreless innings. But the players in the team, they had a very, very diverse lineup. The platoon system that they used was kind of unique because it was players that could play multiple positions, but they were still trying to find their way. Now, the Blue Jays that year had, of course, Ernie Witt, Willie Upshaw, Damaso Garcia, Rance Mulnix, Tony Fernandez, George Bell, Mosby, Barfield, and Jeff Burrows and Cliff Johnson sharing the DH duties. And he had a veteran presence as well with Al Oliver, Len Matuzak, Gard Orge. Some of the younger players were coming through the group, including Kelly Gruber, Mitch Webster, Cecil Fielder, who was basically a Blue Jay project before he ended up being traded to Detroit. But I think what really got through Toronto that year was the starting staff. Dave Stieb, of course, ended up 14-13. Dole Alexander won 17 games. Jimmy Key had another strong year with 14 wins. Clancy had 9. Louis Leal had 3. And Tom Fowler had a kind of a career year with 7 wins and 11 starts. Now, the relief corps was very, very hit and miss because you had Dennis Lamp as well. You had Jim Acker, Stan Clark. The whole team, there was 5 key players that had saves for Toronto that season, 47 in total, but there was no consistent, person to end each game. Henke had these bad moments. Jim Acker seemed to be a person in long relief. Caudle blew about 5 or 6 games just by himself. But by the time the regular season was coming to a close, Toronto had advanced so quickly in the, especially in August and September, they very rarely took a defeat, especially on the road. And the big thing was they were winning consistently on the road, especially against the Yankees. They swept a 3-game series against in September, where Laval, Key, and Alexander had key wins. They did well against the Brewers, and the majority of their September games were against the ALCS, and they did quite well. But they kind of lost momentum in October. Now we're trying to clinch the division. At one point, there were almost 40 games over 500. They ended up at the end of September with a 98-57 record, but they lost a 3-game road series against the Tigers, and the first game against the Yankees, where they were still trying to clinch, they lost. But on October 5th, the dream came true for Toronto, where they finally clinched the division, where Dole Alexander pitched a great game in a 5-1 victory. And that was their 99th win of the year, and at the time that was the most in franchise history, even with the World Championship teams and the ALCS teams of recent memory. That team was basically a team of overachievers, and I tell you why. They had a B plus lineup with an A minus pitching staff, and the AL East was in flux that year because Yankees were weak; they weren't getting the impact of Manly yet. Tigers were getting weaker, but here's how it went in the playoffs. When he went in the playoffs, the bad momentum of the late season kind of fell away. He won the first 2 games at home, were by scores of 6-1 and 6-5. They went to Kansas City for the middle 3 games, and they lost in a late run in Game 3 at 6-5. But they won Game 4, and the veterans like Al Oliver and Ernie Witt really came to fore from Toronto. They were up 3-1 with 3 games to go, and they had 3 opportunities to go into World Series. Now, losing Game 5 in Kansas City wasn't a surprise. Kansas City was always strong at home. They lost 2-0, even though Jimmy Key played a great game. In Game 6, back in Exhibition Stadium with the big crowd at home, they lost that first chance. Gubasa had a great game for Kansas City. Alexander was given the ball to try to put away Kansas City, but he didn't do it, and Toronto had a hard time against Quisenberry in that contest. Now, Game 7, I saw that at JR's restaurant in Woodstock in 1985, and that was a whole hell of damage that Kansas City just... they took their time, but they destroyed Toronto in that game, and I'll tell you why. Cox made some extremely bad lineup decisions, taking Al Oliver out, putting in a DH and Jeff Burrows as a pinch hitter when he never played, for literally almost weeks. Bad hit and runs, bad decisions. But the kicker was when Jim Sundberg hit a 3-run triple off the top of the fence. And, people that were at the game were almost rioting at the end. They were so disappointed with the result. And one infamous moment when one of the Blue Jay fans literally fell drunk out of the stands, and the camera showed him, and basically said, the announcer said, this is kind of respects Toronto season. Now, 1985 started the choke mentality of the Blue Jays, because 87, the choke against the Tigers was unprecedented. They choked in the playoffs against Oakland. They choked in the playoffs against Minnesota. It wasn't until they picked up Alomar and Joe Carter where the choking Blue Jays kind of disappeared. But this Blue Jays was, again, overachievers. If they would have had a better manager, because Bobby Cox was overrated as a manager, and he took a team in Atlanta as talented as they were. They only won one World Series. Now, it was kind of ironic that Toronto would beat Atlanta when Bobby Cox was managing in '92 for the World Series. But I watched literally 90% of the games in '85, and I was very proud to see all those young prospects and those veteran players moving together. But Exhibition Stadium was made for the Blue Jay lineup, and you saw that with the home record and with the AL East. But see, the AL East of 1985 is not like the AL East we see right now in 2019. It's a death division. You look at recent years with the Red Sox and the other teams, the AL East will destroy their opponents. But at the time, I don't know why that everybody in the AL East, besides the Blue Jays, had a weak year in '85. Sure, they won 99 games, but I mean, there was a lot of struggle. And I call the old AL East Cleveland, Milwaukee, Detroit, Yankees, and Boston. You look at them now, all those teams have won titles and pretty well won titles in recent years, except for Baltimore. But Baltimore was strong back then too, because they had the remnants of the '83 World Series team. The Yankees had some left from the '81, the last title team. The Tigers had won the title in '84, so there was a lot good going on in the AL East, and for the Yankees not to take the division and for Toronto to win all those games, it was an off year. So I just take it as it is. But you had a feeling when you were watching the regular season that the bubble was going to burst. And when you haven't won before, it's not hard for the bubble to burst. And because of the downturn with the Maple Leafs and in that era in the 1980s and the Argonauts as well, even though they had some great caps of sex, Toronto at the time was still a losing franchise on every level, mostly because of the Maple Leafs. And the mentality that Toronto was more of a hockey town, and that kind of negativity was passed on to the Blue Jays. Toronto should have went with try to get another veteran player like they did before, getting Ricky Henderson as a backup and Jack Morris. But Toronto wasn't big on their free agent signings at the time because he never had the cash because, the bank and the Labatt's were on a budget, and, the low dollar didn't help any prospects they could get because they were losing literally almost 50% on the exchange. So as we look back in 1985, for those who lived through it, 34 years ago was literally two generations, and I'm glad that the Blue Jays have had at least one title for the mid 80s, because 83 I thought for sure they were going to do it because I saw them in 83 and I saw them do some really have some really strong games, but neither here nor there. 83 when Tippy Martinez picked off 3 Blue Jays back to back in that road game, we knew that was it for the Blue Jays that year. But 83, in my opinion, they were a better team. But 85, there was a weaker AL East, because at the time, the Blue Jays were only good as the AL East was bad. And that year, the AL East was inconsistent. And if you look at the divisional standings at the time, we're just going to go over this very quickly. Cleveland lost 102 games that year. Milwaukee lost 90. Boston was at 500. Baltimore was 5 games over. Detroit was 84-77. New York was 97 wins and didn't make the playoffs. This was a wild card. But you look at the road record, reason why the Blue Jays won the division, they won 45 games on the road, or 9 games over. And the rest of the teams in the AL East were at 500 or under. To win the AL East back then, you had to win the road, and to show how weak the AL East was, is that Toronto was able to win 45 games on the road, and majority of those against the AL East. Now, what was kind of ironic there, they always had trouble with Baltimore. That year against Baltimore, they were 8-4. They were 7-6 against Detroit, 9-4 against Cleveland, 7-6 against the Yankees, and 9-4 against Milwaukee. They had some really big problems with Boston that year, with 4-9. But like I said, the Cleveland and Baltimore dominance put them over the top, and that's what you have to do. You have to beat the second division teams, especially on the road. So again, if you have any memorabilia of the Blue Jays that year, keep them close to hand. I have quite a bit. They even used to get Blue Jay cups at Kmart. If anybody has collected them out there, you got the top sets and the different posters, OPG posters. It was a great year for collectibles that year. So if you have a chance, if you can see the 85 Game 7 on YouTube, please watch it, because it's not too often you see a nightmare happening, because you know how a real horror movie builds and builds and builds and builds? And that Game 7 was a horror, especially Al Oliver on the bench, losing his freaking mind because he was taken out. And Al Oliver pretty well cursed the Blue Jays. Never played ball again, actually. So, and neither did Jeff Burroughs, but that's a story for another time. So on this Saturday, and again, Blue Jays are on a hot streak. We're noticing with Guerrero in the lineup, is opening it out for the rest of the young players on the Blue Jays. Wish them well. I think my prediction will be over 500 by the start of June. If the yard, he could be heavily in the wild card race, but we'll wait and see. We need some of the injured players back, is what I'm saying. Have a good day. Bye.